Hey, Brandeis, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Let's start off with the rapid fire questions. What is the one myth or misconception about lobbying?
The one myth I would say is that I think people have a myth that it's just about fancy dinners and perhaps making nice and whining and dining legislators, but that's probably one of the myths. But the misconception is the influence that you'd have over policy making.
Okay. What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
Oh, good question. If I weren't a lobbyist, in today's temperature and climate, I absolutely would consider being a civil rights attorney.
Excellent. What are the three skills you think are essential for someone to be a good lobbyist?
Great question. Three skills that are essential are, I would say, the ability to continue relationships, being able to identify a need for your particular client, and I would say organization and availability. There's a lot of moving parts and individuals that you would need to have touch points with. So having that availability and easy access would be a must.
Okay. What is your favorite book or hobby?
Okay, I would say my favorite hobby is photography. I'm a portraiture photographer. And one of my favorite books right now is, I would say, Becoming. That's a hard one because I love to read. I'd say Becoming by Michelle Obama.
Okay. And what inspires or motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
What inspires me is the influence over influencing policy in a positive direction.
Okay. And what is the one thing you would like to share which no one else knows about you?
Oh, wow. I feel like I should have been given these questions ahead of time. One thing I would like to share that no one knows about me. That's a really good question. I would say that I wish that I had been able to sit for the bar exam by now. Yeah, I'm an unlicensed attorney, so it would be a lot easier and fit the piece of the puzzle to be able to say that I am licensed, right? Okay. To give some validity.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's get on with your childhood. Can you tell us, like, where did you grow up and how was your childhood like?
So I spent part of my childhood in New Orleans, and I was a city girl growing up. And in fact, I finished high school in Sandy Springs, Georgia, right here in Metro Atlanta. Moved here when I was ninth grade or 10th grade. So I would say I'm a peach now. I've been here a very long time. So having had those dual childhoods spent in two different urban areas, it was pretty interesting, but I grew up in College Park. While I attended school in Sandy Springs, I was in what they call the minority to majority program. So I was bused from South Fulton County to North Fulton County for school at the time. Only girl in a household of two brothers. So I kind of had to, become bossy quite early on, which explains a lot of, why my chosen profession.
Okay. And were you interested in politics back then? I mean, were there any glimpses?
There were, as I early on, kids kind of decide what they're going to be: astronaut, doctor, lawyer. I always figured I'd be a lawyer if I weren't an astronaut, but I was never good at physics or math. So it pretty solidified that I would be an attorney. And the reason that I wanted to be an attorney was to fight on behalf of those who didn't have a voice. So certainly early glimpses of politics was there.
Yeah, that's cool. And were you part of any like student bodies or like were you interested in debates?
Yes, I was. Of course, on student council for a while, and was on a debate team in high school as well.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So after high school, I noticed that did you get into a Bachelor of Arts in English? Was that your first foray into college? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, my mother encouraged me to major in English because she said that attorneys do a lot of writing. So, and we all knew my propensity to not really be stellar in math. So I kind of avoided that side of the campus. So yes, that's part of the reason I majored in English with the concentration, I would say, in political science.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you wanted to get a law degree, but you wanted to first get a foothold on English, command over English. That's why you chose that. Is that right?
Right, and it's interesting because we figured it again. It was to help enhance my writing skills essentially. But a lot of the English, it was more of an English literature as a part of the humanities program at Spelman. More of an English literature. I did more reading than anything, which also was helpful in preparation for law school.
Oh, I see.
So
And
that was the thinking there instead of a political science background.
oh, I see. So why did you think of doing political science?
I just again following my mother's influence. She had she had a lot of nudging. I also joined the Glee Club because she wanted me to. So just thinking that the English major track would have been best. But yeah, come to think about it, if I guess the more analytical path would have been. More appropriate in the sciences because I actually also took philosophy courses, which I enjoyed and excelled in. So the logic a philosophy major probably would have been more concise with the path that I was going with regard to law school.
Oh, interesting. So I also noticed that in 1999 is when you also went to the School of Business.
That's right.
So how did you, I mean, think of going into School of Business?
That was actually a summer program with Dartmouth. They actually had a program with Spelman College. It was a collaboration. It was called the Tuck Business Bridge Program, a collaborative between Goldman Sachs, Tuck at Dartmouth, and Spelman College, where you spend a portion of your summer in a crash MBA course, and then the other portion as a summer analyst at Goldman Sachs. So yes, it was a certificate program. An introduction into what a master's of business administration would be at Dartmouth.
Okay, and did you enjoy that?
I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was an intensive because, as I mentioned, they put 3 years of an MBA program into 6 weeks, essentially. And actually, the program was geared towards students who were studying humanities. I was in a course with arts majors, and various different non-science or non-finance majors who were thrust into this program, and not even understanding there was a reason we were humanities majors. But it was quite interesting. It was fulfilling. We worked on a project for Ben and Jerry's, so that was exciting, and got to explore New Hampshire.
Oh, I see.
So it was good. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So, so looking back, would you say that, with your established career, getting a degree in English and then hints of political science and then even the certificate from the School of Business, is that all, you think the right path to where you are right now? Would you recommend that for anyone else who's listening to this?
Yes, I would, because honestly, as I mentioned early on, offline, that it isn't necessary to be an attorney to be a lobbyist. In fact, some of the more successful lobbyists, I would say, have never seen the inside of a law school. It's just all in some of the things you asked that are essential, that organization, having a good business acumen and being able to identify a client's needs, and be able to make the right phone call. So yes, I don't know that my educational path necessarily speaks directly to how I've ended up in government relations.
Okay. And I've noticed after that, what happened after 2000? I know like you got your degree and graduated, but I see there's before you joined the Doctor of Law at the Georgia State University, there was a gap of like around 6 years. So can you just walk us through as to what happened after that?
So before going to law school, I worked in corporate for a waste industry provider, and decided to go to law school. After that, I actually did spend, well, 6 years after. You're absolutely right. 6 years after I graduated, before going back to law school. So I spent some time in corporate, working in business development and as a lobbyist. As I mentioned, that was kind of the reason I wanted to go back and pursue a law degree, because I'd worked with some consultants who were attorneys, who were able to be quite successful at building a business as attorneys. Because again, I guess, yes, a law degree is helpful in that the analysis of why and how bills become law is important. So you'll have that training, right? So that was a part of it as well. And so, but however, I never practiced. Years after that, I went back into corporate to work in business development and government relations, because I'd established a track record of having developed relationships with elected officials over time, which was beneficial to clients or the corporations that I served.
Interesting. So when you said you started working for corporations, I mean, how did you step into, or like, how did you stumble across government relations? Maybe you can just tell us, like, how did you kind of stumble across that?
Yes, great question. I spent a summer while I was an undergrad on Capitol Hill, and had an opportunity to engage with lobbyists there. And I always put it in the back of my mind. I said, that's what I want to do. Whenever I finish up undergrad, but had no idea how I would get into it. I met someone one day who was a newly elected CEO of a county. And in fact, I was working at a restaurant. This individual would often come to that restaurant. And I took my opportunity then. I told them my interest in working in politics in some way, shape, or form. I always wanted to be, I thought I'd be a lobbyist one day. They introduced me to a boutique lobbying firm that I essentially worked for right out of undergrad for a few years. So so I kind of fell into it. I just opened my mouth though and mentioned the opportunity, and an individual made a phone call. I interviewed, and there was a space for me as a junior or associate with this small firm.
Oh, I see. So after your college degree, how did you move to Washington, D.C. for this position, or were you already there?
And no, I was actually a local level lobbyist. So that's probably one of the other myths about lobbyists, is that they're all housed in these big power brokering firms in DC. But there's a center, an epicenter of power as well in any city where, or any state where there's the state legislature. So I'm a state level lobbyist, state and local. So there's a registration that you'd have to go through, the same as you would, I guess, on a federal level, but of course more stringent and drilled down on the state and local level before engaging with elected officials, or before any elected body on the behalf of any entities.
Interesting. And I also see in your career that you were also a legislative intern at the Georgia State Senate. How did you get that
Yes.
position? And can you tell us, like, what kind of skills you think someone needs to be that intern?
Great question. It was an externship while I was in law school. I attended Georgia State College of Law, which is actually 2 blocks from at the time, was only 2 blocks from the state capitol. They'd actually had a stringent program, a strong program with the legislature. And at the time I worked with the Senate minority leader in that caucus and represented them in terms of any legal research that was needed on behalf of the caucus as they were attempting to introduce any bills. So I actually worked with all of the members of that particular minority caucus. And they would, often tap one of the legal interns, to provide any necessary legal research to help support any bill that they were drafting.
Oh,
so those research and analytical skills were essential again.
I see. So, I mean, like, let's say if you now had to get a chance, and let's say if someone who's listening to this and they're getting a degree in political science or any English or any of those sciences, and if they wanted to get their feet wet in lobbying, what do you think would be the first ideal step for them?
The first ideal step would be, I would like to think that everyone would be as fortunate as I, whenever you just, explain to someone who had the power or influence to kind of make it happen, to connect you with the firm. But most individuals are most successful today, perhaps, starting off as an intern. At the state legislature. Of course, it's important to understand, how bills become law, how that specific state legislature operates, and getting to know those members. That adds value to any lobbying firm that would come back, because you'd have to know how to, get in contact with the legislator, who chairs what committee. Understanding who's running for office and has the best chance of getting into office. So if you're not fortunate enough to work within that state legislature, or even a local city council as chief of staff for a member of council, having served on a campaign. A number of my friends have been successful because they were campaign managers for a congressman or senator or something like that, and they've actually been able to move over into working with that office in-house, and later started very successful and thriving lobbying firms.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I also noticed that you are also a senior associate government affairs at Georgia Capital Associates.
That's correct.
Can you tell us, what kind of, policies or any projects which you can highlight, saying like this is what you're really proud of?
The projects that I'm proud of at Georgia Capital Associates is probably the work, again, that we were able to do with surrounding the state flag in Georgia. We represented the Georgia Hotel and Lodging Association. It's an association of all of the downtown area hotels in the city of Atlanta, and some other metro hotels that are members of that association. They were most interested in maintaining the economic drivers that the hotels and restaurants provide in the state. So it was important that the policies surrounding the state flag changed to continue to have a thriving tourism environment in the state of Georgia.
Interesting. And can you tell us, what kind of skills did you acquire until 2013? So with all your experience and in whatever degrees you've achieved, and getting a law degree, and also working as an intern, can you tell us, if you had to summarize all of that into, what kind of skills did you get out of it that currently is helping you out in your current position?
Right, great question. The most important skill, and I even applied this past session where I was still learning and growing, was understanding the basics, right? How a bill becomes law. Every state legislature has a certain set of rules surrounding bill passage, but also being skilled enough to understand how to either stall a bill or push a bill's passage. That's the most successful lobbyists are quite skilled in understanding the calendar, how long it would take a bill to actually go through all of the committees and get to the main floor. So I would say something that I'm still learning, even outside of being able to analyze a bill, which is also critical, because you need to be able to go back and apply that and tell your client how a particular bill impacts them line by line. But also, if you've introduced legislation on behalf of an industry or your client, or special interest group, you need to be able to understand exactly how that bill is going to get into and out on both sides of the legislature, but also how you can successfully and keenly stall a bill, amend a bill, or work a bill through, say have it be called a rider bill onto something totally not germane, but to be able to influence enough to get a committee chairman or the bill's author to attach that bill to something else to have successful passage. Really, that's all in it. It's a very strategic game of chess. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably giving away the keys to the city, but that is a lot of our work as lobbyists.
Yeah, and after that point, I've seen you stepped into for some time as a business development manager, and also you are also a NRE permitting manager. Can you just walk us through, what kind of roles did you play there, and how has it helped you?
Right. So that actually calls up some of the early work that I did as a business development manager with the waste firm. I was responsible for successfully getting permit passage for landfill developments and transfer station developments. And I did the same work on the behalf of a small cell provider to get cell towers permitted. So it takes, again, skill and understanding, because in both of those instances, I would either have to influence current law and work within the parameters of special permitting ordinances and local jurisdiction to be able to successfully get a permit. So that was in both instances. And again, it also, the benefit that the company had in onboarding me as an employee was the fact that I understood how laws worked in those jurisdictions, understood how to, influence perhaps an amendment of ordinances to successfully get a permit through, and also had the relationships with elected officials or the right administration team member to be able to have the conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you were the chief of staff at the Georgia General Assembly, House of Representatives. Can you tell us, how did you get that position, and what kind of responsibilities did you have?
Right. So I often had a hybrid role whenever I was working in corporate, and in between times, if I was not in-house with a firm, I was doing campaign work. So I've been a campaign consultant, campaign manager, what they call a field director for a number of different candidates. And the individual, the state representative that I served, whose office I served as a chief of staff, we worked on campaigns together in the past. So of course, because our policy ideology aligned, it was easy to serve together on campaigns, but also then turn around and work in-house in that person's office to help set their policy agenda and hopefully influence and get some bills passed based on said policy ideology alignment in my role as chief of staff. So again, it was someone that I'd had a relationship with, worked on campaigns together, and they brought me in to help.
Nice.
So after you were the chief of staff, you worked as the vice president of business partnerships at Ohio River South. Tell us through what was your experience there like, and what kind of responsibilities you had.
Yes, it was an exciting time to join a new kind of a startup firm. The firm at the time had probably been only 4 years old. And whenever I onboarded, it was at a time when the portfolio was growing in a great way. We were diversifying our entire team. In fact, as we started adding on not only expansion by way of clientele, but also within our internal team of incredibly talented individuals who had handled things from government relations to campaigns. In fact, the entire team was instrumental in working on the now mayor of Atlanta's campaign and pouring in any way we possibly could. And as you can imagine, that success was able to lend to an incredibly opening of doors of opportunities. So it was a fun time to be on board at the early start of the firm, and as it was really maturing and enjoying some early successes, really setting Ohio River South up, long term for some great opportunities.
Nice. So after that, I see that you've started your new venture. Tell us, what sparked that transition, and what is your mission here?
Well, it's great. I actually had some personal, at the time when it was so exciting to work with Ohio River South, I actually had some personal drivers to kind of, really peak up in terms of my children and the time that they needed from me. While the opportunities with a small lobbying firm was great in that, but it also of course, required a lot of demands. It were fun demands, but demanding nonetheless whenever you think about the session and interacting with legislators at the state legislature. So I decided to take a step back and pivot. I had opportunities and offers to join in-house with corporate teams, but again, it would have taken away from some of the personal demands of being, a full-time mom. So while it was very difficult to both transition from Ohio River South and to decline opportunities to join up with corporate companies, I had to put, unfortunately, family first. And I know it came at a time when a lot of people during the pandemic had to make a tough decision. Either they were at home and got a taste of remote life, or they realized how much they were missing out on having young kids. And I kind of fall in the category of having young kids who needed a lot more time from me than I would have been able to give with such a great opportunity with both the small firm and working in corporate. So since that transition, I decided to, I said, you know what, no better time than to, really grow and utilize the engagements that I've developed over the past few years and really set out on my own. That way it gives me the bandwidth, right, to be mom and to be a leader.
Oh, interesting. And what is your mission here at the Marlborough Group?
My mission is twofold, actually. One thing that I recognized in nearly 2 decades of engaging as a client services manager or even as a lobbyist, clients really do appreciate that 100% or that feeling that I'm only giving them my 100% and they're getting a lot from me. So I, with this platform and being able to kind of manage and set what my own scale would be, I get to work with a subset of clients that I've handpicked, only a small number so that they can continue to enjoy that really kind of full-scale 100% client services where they can call me at any given moment. And that's a very manageable portfolio, while also being able to continue to be a disruptor or be creative in terms of helping startup companies handle policy. There are a lot of companies that haven't had ordinances on the book because what they do is new, in any particular space. So this gives me a chance to kind of set my own terms while focusing on, how I keep a work-life balance, and B, I can also help firms that have an interest that are non-traditional and that can work and be creative to implement any policy.
Interesting. So what kind of clientele are you planning to hold on to in this new role?
So I have a diverse portfolio right now, in that I work with clientele at the state legislature. And I also have individuals that I work on a project basis at local governments who are hoping to get business development in the space of government procurement. And business-to-business opportunities. So small companies, sometimes single shingles, but also associations at the state legislature, where a lot of the work would pick up in January, obviously.
Interesting. So let me ask you a question which has been on my mind. What do you see the role of minorities in government relations? And how do you think we can improve that situation?
Right. It's interesting you ask that, because whenever I was getting encouragement from some of my peers and colleagues in this space to perhaps go out on my own with a single shop, they namely, and these were non-minorities who they namely mentioned, of course, in an election year where we could perhaps have the reality of a Governor Abrams, which would be a first, in, obviously in the state of Georgia, having representation that could speak to, the gubernatorial candidate on either side, obviously, but namely, if we have the reality of a Governor Abrams and how things are changing at the state legislature, I think it's incredibly important from both corporate interest as well as public entity interest to have more minorities or people of color in this space to be able to engage on both sides of the aisle. And speaking to how the demographic could be shifting, as polling has shown, at the state legislature, certainly within local government municipalities. So I think it's highly important. And again, I've gotten that encouragement from people who don't look like me, who are non-people of color, to really position myself to take advantage of the future of Georgia and what that holds.
Okay. And how would you encourage the youth to be more involved in government relations?
I think it's incredibly important. We through internships, clearly, I know that that's one of the reasons I became highly interested in being a lobbyist whenever I was an undergrad many moons ago. But if it isn't through internships, I think it's important to touch and educate high school students as well as current college students on the importance of policy advocates across not just as we hear about corporate lobbyists, corporate special interests, but their special interests as people are becoming more and more aware of, even from a nonprofit space, to influence state legislatures or local legislatures and the federal government, of course, on behalf of any client. So I think it's important to, because I think people are learning more and more about how local government influences and impacts your life. As important to vote for a president. And actually, I misspoke. It's probably more important to vote for your local judiciary or your local sheriff than it is to vote for your president. Of course, get out and vote no matter what. But I would say, as people are understanding the import of that, I think it's also instructive that they understand how critical it is to, be a professional in the government relations space.
Mm-hmm. And how would you educate the public the role of a lobbyist or government relations expert, if you had to put them in layman's terms?
So in layman's terms, it's interesting you ask that. I had a question not long ago, how would you explain what I do to a kindergartner, perhaps? But in layman's terms, if we had to think of an example, if you don't like how things are being run at your local board of education, as an example, you would either form an association of your peers to be able to plan out how you would advocate and go before the Board of Education hearings, plan a strategy around how you would meet with individual decision makers within the Board of Education, either those who are elected or those who work for that Board of Education, to be able to influence the change that you want. And the squeaky wheel certainly gets the grease, and that's just one aspect of it. If you are not in a position to be able to hire advocates, right? Say you're starting a new business, a tech startup. There are new regulations that you've heard about or read about in a paper that could impact your business bottom line. If you're in a position to invest, much like you invest in an attorney, much as you'd invest in an engineer, if it were applicable, or any consultant, you would invest in hiring a government relations consultant to go before and advocate on your behalf before the state legislature or local government to help protect your business bottom line. So if that's in layman terms enough, I think that can show sort of the import of exactly what it is, government relations professionals.
Very cool. Very cool. So looking towards the future, what are your aspirations, or what kind of advice would you share for anyone who's getting into government relations? You want to talk anything about that, or you want to talk about yourself? The platform is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Deepak. I can answer it in both ways. My aspirations for the Melbrew Group, as I mentioned, is to provide the type of turnkey, top-notch, personalized client services for any client that actually comes to my company to seek my services, and that they would understand and know that I would give them, 100%, utilizing all of the tools in my arsenal, from relationships to strategy and know-how. So that's a part of it. And growing the company to scale, going back to our earlier conversation about being a person of color, a woman of color, and utilizing my platform to show other women of color that they too can operate in this space. I only have a handful of peers that I see on the regular at the state legislature. There are probably more individuals on the federal level, of course, who operate in this space, but people see the individuals at their state and local level a lot more. Only a handful of peers that look like me, and I think that it's important that I wave the banner and educate others to know that they can also operate in this space, and that there's a need for among corporate clients and government clients to hire individuals that represent this demographic, to speak to some of the cultural and also historical aspects of any policies that are implemented. And I think going from that aspiration of the way that I manage my client services interests and being an example and representation for those who are watching everything that I do. And to add to those numbers, understanding that there are only, the percentage of women legislators, period, is, pales in comparison to the men legislators. So of course, you won't necessarily until, a while from now see an exact proportionate amount of women advocates, of course, at the state legislature, but that's changing. And to be a part of this historic moment, to be a part of an opportunity to represent something that people don't see on a regular basis. Even if you aren't a person of color, it isn't every day that a high school student grows up saying that they want to be a lobbyist, right? Or a college student to recognize or have opportunities to intern in this space. Mm-hmm. So take that a step further if you're a person of color to really have that opportunity. And so that's kind of the aspiration and where I see this firm going.
Very nice. Well, Brandeis, you truly add an inspiration for the rest of us. Keep inspiring us through whatever ventures you take on. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Deepak, and for everything that you do and for highlighting us in this space.
Thank you. Right.